A very good evening, everyone. Everyone who has forded over puddles and ponds to be here with us today. It's the 18th book club event of the monthly Bengal Club Book Club, located in the realms of the library subcommittee of this historic institution, where authors, scholars, members explore and engage with books and the process of writing. Despite the searing temperatures that are pushing the mercury up to distressing levels globally, as the conceptualizer and anchor of this book club, I extend a very warm welcome to our celebrity author, Professor Dr. Uma Dasgupta today, and the international galaxy of Tagore studies specialists to our book club discussions. The Bengal Club straddles some very interesting colonial and post-colonial history. It was founded in 1827, is the oldest social club of Asia, and one of its first presidents was Sir Charles Metcalfe. This was also the residence of Sir Thomas Babington Macaulay, when he was the law member of the Supreme Council between 1834 and 1838. The video clip you will witness and hopefully enjoy of our club, and in celebration of the library, was created recently by our chair of the library subcommittee, who's very kindly here, the renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Chatterjee, who is much more than a cutting-edge medical specialist. As I remember him from my school days, he is an excellent debater, actor, a doctor who pens some touching poetry that has been published, a wildlife enthusiast, a gourmet, and so much more. So Shondeep, if you'd like to say a few words, we will show the video of the Bengal Club and the library that you've created after you've said a few words, so we don't corral you if you have to go back to the operating theater. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you, Julie. And on behalf of the Library Subcommittee of the Bengal Club, which is, as you've just heard, the oldest club in Asia, and one which in the next few years, in fact, only 5 years from now, is going to celebrate its 200th anniversary. Welcome on behalf of the Library Subcommittee to this fabulous meeting. You know, the very mention of Tagore creates a different feeling in the minds of everybody in this part of the world in Bengal. And then when you have Tagore penned by somebody who has been one of the anchors of the Library Subcommittee of the Bengal Club, it fills all of us with awe and admiration. And Dr. Uma Dasgupta has really excelled herself in this book that she's written. We know that it was in 1912 when Rabindranath Tagore bought this Kuti Bari with its surrounding lands from the Zamindar of Raipur in a place called Surul, not so far away from Sriniketan. And that started his adventure with rural Bengal and his experiment with Sriniketan, which is so beautifully portrayed in the book. And if Sriniketan was the outlet for his academic involvement, Sriniketan, in fact, was the outcome of his experiences with rural Bengal and a result of his feelings and thoughts about the villages of Bengal. But I dare not tell you very much about Sriniketan or about this book. Asking a brain surgeon to talk about Sriniketan in the presence of Uma Dasgupta is a bit like asking your barber to talk about the brain. The problem is not only a problem of perception of depth, it's also a problem of depth of perception. I will just perform the much more simpler task of introducing a contemporary lady of mine who was my contemporary in Asian academics, but unfortunately now has seared well above me in academics and has gone below me in age because she gets younger every day. And that is Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta. She's the one who conceptualizes and curates the monthly book club at the Bengal Club. And she's been doing phenomenal work on this. She was born and educated in Calcutta. She went to a school called Loretta House, which is one of the pioneering schools in Calcutta. She then went to Jadavpur University. She earned a master's and a doctorate degrees in English literature, South Asian studies at the University of Toronto. She's been an expert in post-colonial and world literature, diasporic histories, memories, and foodways, and she taught in the Department of English and Canadian Studies program at the University of Toronto. In fact, it would not be out of place to mention that Julie's translation of Rabindranath's play Dagghar, or Post Office, was performed to celebrate his 150th birth anniversary in Toronto. And her translation earned her the title of one of the 16 most influential South Asians in Canada. Julie is not only talented in the field of literature, she's a fantastic organizer and even a better cook. And those of us who have had the opportunity to savor all three would find it difficult to decide which is her best claim to fame. But I will leave it at that and let you enjoy the evening. And Dr. Uma Dasgupta is somebody that we have really got to place on the pedestal onto which she belongs. And as you read this book, the height of the pedestal will grow taller and taller. I will stop here and I will let Julie handle this program, because I'm afraid I have no qualification to deal with such weighty academics. As my wife always told me, a brain surgeon is different from all other doctors also, because they require only one brain, and that's the brain of their patient. So nothing I can say can be very illuminating. And I'm going to stop here and hand over to Julie to conduct the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Always, you've blown us away, Shondeep. And I'm really overwhelmed. Very kind of you to say such wonderful things. And I hope we have an evening that is all that you promise that it will be. And I'm sure it will be with the galaxy of stars that we have. But as is our tradition, Mr. Gurudash, will you be kind enough to please play the video clip of our club and our library that Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee has put together?
Sure, ma'am.
Welcome to the oldest social and business club in India, the Bengal Club. Set up in 1827 as a meeting place where people from the military, the judiciary, businessmen and professionals of the British Empire gathered together. Independence brought about a change in clientele, but not in character. Professionals, businessmen, people from the service sector, bureaucrats, and academics started rubbing shoulders in the corridors of this hallowed institution.
Gurudas, the video is not running.
Welcome to the library of the Bengal Club, an institution within an institution. A veritable collection of books, the like of which you're unlikely to. Welcome to the oldest social and business club in India, the Bengal Club. Set up in 1827 as a meeting place where people from the military, the judiciary, businessmen and professionals of the British Empire gathered together. Independence brought about a change in clientele, but not in character. Professionals, businessmen, people from the service sector, bureaucrats, and academics started rubbing shoulders in the corridors of this hallowed institution. Welcome to the library of the Bengal Club, an institution within an institution. A veritable collection of books, the like of which you're unlikely to find anywhere else in the city, and indeed in this country. Recordings by famous speakers who have spoken here in the library, and a collection of books on any subject that you may want to look for. Books by Nobel laureates, books by Bengal Club members, books on political science, philosophy, ethics and morality, food and drinks, sports and culture. Mention the subject and it's available here. There is also a small Wi-Fi corner where you can browse the internet in peace. They say there is no subject under the sun. If you're looking for a book, you will find it on these shelves of the Library of the Bengal. Envy the books, enjoy the collection, but above all, celebrate in the ambience of this wonderful library, the Library of the Bengal Club. Welcome to see the other famous individuals who have launched their books on this site. And recordings of that book launch are also available in this library. Welcome to the Library of the Bengal Club. On behalf of the Library Subcommittee, welcome to this program.
Thank you so much, Shondeep. That is always appreciated and comprehensive, compelling, and I think it gives us a pretty good idea of the club as well as the library of this club. Without further ado, I think we'll jump right in. I just want to mention right at the outset that for many of us, it's a bit of a difficult evening. We are here to pay tribute to Umadi and her wonderful book, A History of Sriniketan. But a few hours ago, we also got the news that a dear colleague and somebody that many of us know, Pro Vice Chancellor of the Jadavpur University, comparative literature professor, Dr. Shamantop Das, passed away.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know.
Yes, Amita Di. I got to know very recently too, in a few hours ago. It wasn't a happy death, but anyway, he would have, I guess, been the last person who wrote a wonderful review of Umadi's book. And that is why I think it is very surreal that this happened not only on the same day, but almost a few hours apart. So let's just hope that this evening would be what he would wanted to be, and he would very much want to be here if he were here. So Rabindranath Tagore was a visionary. He was a philanthropist, a poet with titanic abilities who put ideas into praxis. Over a century ago, long before insightful contemporary historians, theorists, social scientists, oceanographers, activists against climate change were clamoring for sustainable development, equitable distribution of resources, and coining fashionable catchphrases like the Anthropocene century, raising a rout against the abysmal plight of rural poverty among abject masses in decolonizing nations. Tagore, with elegance and concision, shone the light on the urgency of planning and implementing a blueprint for rural reconstruction. His heartbreak in encountering the destitutes on the Shelidaho estate, including disempowered women, was transformed into a burning zeal to turn not just the lives of the hopeless and the hapless onto some hope, but as he said repeatedly in his poetry and his letters, to evolve from an adept employer of the pen to the user of a spade. Our distinguished author today for the July 2022 Bengal Book Club is Professor Dr. Uma Dasgupta, Doctor of Philosophy from Oxford, and we are exploring her most recent book, A History of Sriniketan. She's a historian and Tagore biographer, and a litany of fascinating devotion to Tagore, a devotion that spans a lifetime, possibly a devotion kindled by her father, or should I say her parents, S.C. Ray and Shoti Ray, who were among the pioneers of Sriniketan work. The book, A History of Sriniketan, is dedicated to them. Educated at Presidency College, Calcutta, and the University of Oxford, UK, she taught at Jadavpur University, Calcutta, and Vishwabharati University, Shantiniketan, and the Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta and Delhi, from where she retired in 2004 as Professor, Social Sciences Division. She was head of the United States Educational Foundation in India for the Eastern region from 1984 to 1999. She held visiting fellowships at the University of Oxford, UK, and Columbia. During 2005 and 2008, she was editorial fellow, Center for the Study of Civilizations, Government of India, Delhi, for the project of the History of Indian Science, Philosophy, and Culture. Then, during 2012 to 14, she was invited to a national fellowship at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. During 2014 to 2018, she was a board member of the Indian Delegacy for Oxford University Press in the UK. As I said, a litany of titles for books is, to say the least, prodigious and formidable. I remember there was standing room only at the Bengal Club when her book, A Difficult Friendship, Letters of Edward Thompson and Rabindranath Tagore, 1913 to 1940, by Oxford University Press, was published. I think it was 2003, and there was standing room only in room 175, which holds a lot of people. In 2004, there was Rabindranath Tagore biography. 2006, Rabindranath Tagore, My Life and My Words. 2008, Rabindranath in Bengali. 2009, the Oxford India Tagore, Selected Writings on Education and Nationalism. 2010, Science in Modern India and Institutional History, circa 1784 to 1947. 2013, Rabindranath Tagore, An Illustrated Life. 2015, The Global Reception of Rabindranath Tagore. Editorial advisor, edited by Martin Kempchen and Imra Banga. 2018, Friendships of Largeness and Freedom. Andrews, Tagore, and Gandhi, An Epistolary Account, 1912 to 1940. 2022 is the book on our table today, A History of Shantiniketan. Incredible. Ubadi, this is the moment many of us have been waiting for. The floor is all yours. Take it away. You have to.
Thank you very much. This is much, much more than what I deserve. And I truly believe this. Very kind and very gracious and very generous. But I really feel deeply embarrassed and obviously very humbled. And indeed, I would be failing in my duty if I didn't thank the Bengal Club's Library Subcommittee, Dr. Chatterjee, who's been chairman, whose encouragement is behind what is happening today. And the idea was entirely Julie's, not remotely mine. So this is all their work, of which I'm a beneficiary. And I'm so grateful that my friends have joined from all over the world, and all of them who have actually been working on Rabindranath in various ways, and most interesting ways. Chris Marsh, Kathy O'Connell, Shudi Chanal Mashai, Amita Chatterjee, Mihaila Grigor, Mitali Chakraborty, Nigel Hughes, and Radha Chakraborty has also joined us. And all of them are in the circle of Tagore studies and have contributed in their own ways very importantly to Tagore studies. As a Tagore biographer, my dominant theme is about a poet who is an indefatigable man of action. His Sriniketan work is of primary importance in that theme. And this is why writing a history of Sriniketan has been a priority for me. His work as an educator and rural reformer is even today hardly known because his genius as a poet and a songwriter has overshadowed his work as an educator, rural reformer, and institutional builder. In fact, that area of research was quite virgin when I started it as a postdoctoral project in the mid-1970s. The idea of doing something to redeem the neglected village came to him when he first went to live in his family's agricultural estates in East Bengal, where his father sent him as estate manager in 1889. The decade that he spent there was his first exposure to the impoverished countryside. He was then 30, already a poet of fame, and had lived only in the city till then. The experience played a seminal part in turning him into a humanist and a man of action. The closer he felt to the masses of his society, the further he moved from his own middle-class milieu, who were indifferent to the masses. His independent thinking gave him the courage of a conviction to work alone with his ideas of constructive Swadeshi. Disillusioned with nationalist politics, he turned to his own responses to the many troubled questions of his times. My focus has been on the concerns that featured persistently in his writings and his actions. His fundamental concerns were about the alienation in our own society between the elite and the masses, about race conflict, about the absence of unity in our society, about understanding India's history as a stream of multiple civilizations. As a colonial subject, his evolving concerns were over nationalism, national self-respect, internationalism. His unshaken primary goal was for an alternative education and humanism, which is best expressed in his collection of essays titled The Religion of Man. As a pragmatist, he knew he could not do a great deal given his meager resources as an individual. But he was determined to make at least a beginning with the work. He aimed for a revitalized peasantry, for village self-reliance through self-income generating small-scale enterprises, cottage industries, and cooperative values. He wrote, quote, "If we could free even one village from the shackles of helplessness and ignorance, an ideal for the whole of India would be established. Let a few villages be rebuilt in this way, and I shall say, they are my India. I shall say that is the way to discover the true India," end quotation. And I look forward to comments from and to the learning of the others who have so kindly joined us. Thank you.
Thank you, Umadi. Much to mull about, much to think about, and much to look forward to on the nuggets that you have thrown us and how our esteemed panelists will pick up on those issues and give us more grist to the mill. So without further ado, we are looking greatly forward to hearing Dr. Chris Marsh. Dr. Christine Marsh is an independent scholar with a background in research on land use and land degradation. She's the author of Tagore Speaks to the 21st Century and several published articles on making connections between Tagore's writings and world events and the global environmental crisis. Her current focus is on the contemporary relevance of Tagore's work on rural reconstruction to local sustainability and permaculture design. She's managing trustee, editor-in-chief for the internationally recognized information provider Plants for a Future. She originated Plants for a Future, Plants to Save the Planet project to provide resources for designers of carbon farms and food forests. Recently introduced a funding initiative to help new food forest projects get started. So the question I think that she's throwing out today is, does Tagore's faith in humankind suggest that there is some ideal way of life we might aspire to, regardless of the starting point? I will leave Dr. Marsh to answer that question, or at least look at the question from different angles. So, Chris, we are all eager to hear what you have to say. Please go ahead. We have 6 minutes for each of our esteemed panelists. And if we have time at the end, we will throw it open to questions or observations to make for a free flow evening. So over to you.
Thank you, Julie.
Chris,
In my
please go
6-minute
ahead.
presentation, can you all hear me? I will make some general connections between Uma's new book on the history of Sriniketan and my own work as an environmentalist, and then mention the kinds of specific and detailed connections I see in the book. First of all, I want to say that Tagore's work on rural reconstruction at Sriniketan has always been my main interest in Tagore, and I very much welcome this new, very detailed and comprehensive treatment. Uma's book is remarkable for all the strands and connections between Tagore's ideas and aspirations, the work he initiated and oversaw, and how it developed over the last 20 years of his life. The first book by Uma that I read was her Rabindranath Tagore biography from 2004 about the relatively lesser known aspects of Tagore's life, namely his work as an educator and rural reformer. Uma and I met in 2010 at a 150th birth anniversary conference in London. Since then, she's been an important friend and supporter as I struggled to write a PhD thesis on Tagore's English writings and continued my work as an environmental activist. Uma's history of Sriniketan is important for me in my work on solutions to the existential crisis we face in the world today. I believe we need local self-reliance in diverse forms around the world, and Tagore's work on rural reconstruction provides a valuable model. Since 1989, I have been making connections between Tagore's work and permaculture, permanent agriculture and permanent culture, which is a teaching movement passing on the ethics and principles of designing ways for local communities to meet their needs from diverse, productive ecosystems based on natural models. I first heard about Tagore and also about permaculture in 1989. I met Marjorie Sykes in that year, the Quaker Gandhian, as I knew her, who taught at Sriniketan from 1939 to 1941 and worked with Tagore in the last year of his life, translating what became my boyhood days. She told me that Tagore was a deep ecologist and pointed me to his essay, City and Village, from 1928. In the first part of City and Village, Tagore relates a dystopian tale about how the moon was once a living planet, but became bare and lifeless when a race of people was born, which plundered the moon's resources and, quote, soon outstripped nature's power of recuperation. Their profit makers created wants that were unnatural. They dug deep into the stored capital of nature and ruthlessly exploited her resources. Tagore ends his story with a highly prescient warning. My imaginary Selenites behave exactly in the way that human beings are today behaving on this earth. In the second part of City and Village, Tagore goes over his life's work of trying to help village people and inspire them to help themselves. I haven't been an environmentalist all my life. I cannot remember a time when I didn't know that people are destroying life on Earth. But my main focus has been on land degradation and the harm caused by agriculture, what Tagore referred to as the robbery of the soil, which gets a mention in Uma's book, as everything else does. Back in the 1970s and 80s, I carried out a lot of research and teaching on land use and land degradation, and I was often in despair about the seriousness of the problems and the lack of interest from the general public and activists alike. All the attention seemed to be shifting to the future threat of climate change, which of course isn't a future threat now, it's already with us. But then I discovered permaculture with the hope of new ways of producing food in diverse plantings of edible perennial plants, designed to meet the needs of local people, and I trained it in its design approach and became deeply involved in the movement. I became interested again in Tagore in 2005, making his short stories and novels the subject of my dissertation for an MA in literature, then wanted to go further with a PhD. After I met Uma in 2010, we stayed in touch by email, we met a few times, and she used to send me suggestions and texts, her own papers from the 1970s, wonderful, wonderful papers, relevant poems and writings by Tagore, which I interwove with what I was finding for myself. In my writings on Tagore, I have always seen his relevance, his hopes for a new dawn, as connected to movements like permaculture, out of which the Transition Network, that's a global network, emerged in recent years to help local groups turn to local food growing, local craft skills, the pleasures of creativity and celebration, life in its completeness, in Tagore's famous words. The charity Plants for Future, which I've been managing for 15 years, also emerged out of permaculture and provides an internationally important online database with details of thousands of useful plants for designers of food forests to choose from. And recently, Plants for Future has launched a Food Forest Fund to help new food forest projects get started. The key connection between food forests and Tagore's work at Sriniketan is diversity. Food forests are the ultimate in diversification, with over 8,000 useful plants to call on in the Plants for Future database. Diversifying was also an important part of the work at Sriniketan, with new crops and new varieties being encouraged at different scales, from home gardens to fields and farms. Grant funding too has connections. When people are trying new methods or aiming for a fresh start, a small amount of funding can be a big help, which is something Tagore recognized right back from the time when he was supporting farmers on the Tagore family estates in the 1890s. There are very many other connections and parallels between Tagore's work at Sriniketan, seen as a model, and the changes towards local self-reliance urgently needed in the world today. And I look forward to working on Uma's wonderful book to draw those out and make them more widely known. I mean, this is an example of the sort of book that I produce with Plants for Future. There's nothing about Tagore in there. My colleagues know that I'm a huge Tagore admirer, and you know, that they're happy to listen to what I say about him. But what I want to do is to actually marry Uma's book and all that she has to say in there with the sort of thing that we will write in our next book. I mean, to bring the two together is an important project for me from now on. That's my task. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marsh. Fascinating intersectionality that you're planning, and I'm sure most of us would love to know what happens in that journey to find commonalities between Umadi's work and yours. And many of our panelists might believe that had Tagore not been such an exceptional poet, his innovative efforts in rural reconstruction and the ideas of biodiversity might have made him a messiah of sorts of economic empowerment, perhaps. And I think already, you know, what you said is speaking to Professor Nigel Hughes's paper. So I think we're all very excited. Thank you so very much, Professor Marsh. Our next speaker is Professor Cathy O'Connell. And I must preface my introduction by saying that both my historian husband, Harish, and I are indebted greatly to Professor Cathy O'Connell and Professor Joseph O'Connell, her late husband, who were the first academics we met when we went to do our PhDs at the University of Toronto, and they were the first very kind hosts. And I will never forget that lunch where we spoke and we ate so happily, Cathy. Seems like yesterday. So Cathy did her MA from Jadavpur in comparative literature in '67, PhD from the University of Toronto in South Asian history in 2005, and taught courses on Bengali cultural history at New College, University of Toronto, focusing on Rabindranath Tagore and Satyajit Ray. Publications include numerous articles on Tagore's educational theory and practice. Bravo, Professor Shonku, Bengali to English, a translation of 3 of Satyajit Ray's stories. Rabindranath Tagore, Facets of a Cultural Icon, special issue of the University of Toronto Quarterly, volume 77, number 4. I still remember that, fall of 2008. Rabindranath Tagore, Reclaiming a Cultural Icon, Kolkata Vishwabharati in 2009, in which I am chuffed to have a chapter. both jointly edited with Joseph O'Connell and Rabindranath Tagore, the poet, as educator, Vishwabharati in 2012. So I think Kathy's expertise, her nuances on how Tagore, as a consummate human being who wrote about the attaining a level of human excellence or spiritual regeneration, helping individuals and communities, has been probably the driving factor in Kathy's work. And she's very competent in telling us about the educational aspect of Tagore's experiments. Kathy, please go right ahead. We are waiting eagerly to hear you.
Well, thank you, Julie, for those kind words. And it's nice seeing you again after such a long time. I'm very honored to be a part of this evening's tribute to Uma Dasgupta's History of Sriniketan. And I would begin by joining in the chorus of appreciating Uma for the absolutely tremendous contribution she has made to Tagore studies over decades. And we have all benefited so greatly from it. Since our time is short, I'm going to read my comment. A History of Sriniketan, Rabindranath Tagore's pioneering work in rural reconstruction, is of special importance because, while much is known of Tagore's pedological experiment in Shantiniketan, his work in reconstruction is less familiar to most. One senses this is a work that is especially close to the author's heart because of the close family connection that exists with Sriniketan, where her father became a Dartington Fellow in the late 30s, helping to bring scientific agriculture to the project. Umadi's style is very accessible and always backed up by meticulous research. She writes not only for the academic community, where she is much respected, but for the general public as well. Behind her many publications and presentations, one becomes aware of the tireless commitment and determination to document and provide a historical record of the various phases of Rabindranath's life and his voluminous contributions, which can only be described as a labor of love. Umadi's research is always painstaking, and her background work for the history of Sriniketan is no less so. I have a personal recollection of the time she spent rescuing valuable Sriniketan papers that had been put in a Sriniketan storeroom. Several diligent months were spent patiently cataloging and filing the papers until they were eventually shifted over to Rabindra Bhavan, where to be properly preserved. The book's narrative traces the timeline of Tagore's pioneering work, beginning in the 1890s, when his father chose him, the youngest son, to be in charge of the family estates in East Bengal. Efforts to develop educational opportunities, cooperative farming, common water supplies, and road building met with more failure than success because of fears that someone would get greater advantage. One of the successful initiatives took place in the Kaligram Pargana, which includes Potishar. An agricultural bank was set up and a village society was initiated to provide educational facilities for children and a high school at Potishar. Other activities included the implementation of crop diversification and the establishment of a weaving school. And my husband, Joseph, and I were able to visit Podishar in 2006 and were much impressed with the prosperity and friendliness we found there. And the lack of commercialization was something that really stood out. By the time Rabindranath met British agronomist Leonard Elmhurst in 1919, his thinking on uplift had evolved. From his personal experience with the East Bengal estates and the village surveys that had been done, it was clear from the beginning the priority had to be on transformation of consciousness, to foster an attitudinal change among the villagers that would shift them away from helplessness, suspicion, and dependence on government to an attitude of self-determination, or Atma Shakti, as he called it, at the local level. Since mere help from outside had been shown to be harmful. In Shantiniketan, Tagore's educational model had been groundbreaking for its emphasis on a humane, non-authoritarian style of teaching, which saw the instructor more as facilitator than authoritarian figure, and who was in touch with the environment and aimed at overall development of the personality. In Sriniketan, educational initiatives were given a high priority, and Tagore envisioned a parallel humane society for village education with a priority given to the youth of the villages, since experience had shown that if the youth could be involved, the adults would follow. The Sriniketan Institute offered a variety of educational programs through 3 separate institutions. At the formal level, the Shikshatra school, where education is given freely, was conceived as a parallel school for village boys and later girls. The learning framework was premised on direct learning that reflected a more practical adaptation to village life, as compared with the Sriniketan ideals, such as connection to the natural environment, autonomy, perceptual training, hands-on learning, and development of social responsibility. The Shikshatra curriculum, while including the basics, also included the collection of medicinal herbs, gardening, carpentry, painting, cooking, and housecraft, as well as basic health. Each student had to apprentice himself in some handicraft and housecraft. And the book documents the successful careers of some of those early students who went on to make contributions to the village. Informal education, which included the Brati Balikas, was administered through the village welfare department, which was also in charge of a girls' school. The Brati Balika organization, modeled on the Baden-Powell Scout movement, gained popularity, and by 1928, there were 800 members organized in 30 centers. The Brati Balikas sought to break down caste and religious differences through group games, music and plays, water purification, sanitation, fire brigades, and so on. They contributed to breaking down class and religious differences through their help with the village festivals, which were very important, such as the Borsha Mangal in the rainy season, Brika Ropan for tree planting, Bashanta Utshab for celebrating spring, and so on. With the encouragement of Ratindranath and Protima Tagore, the Brati movement also became the basis for enhancing the artistic life of the villages. And again, that was so central to Tagore's philosophy. He wanted to bring joy to the villages. Some of the conclusions drawn by the study attribute the lack of success to achieve the mental transformation that Tagore had envisioned to governmental and middle-class indifference and a general lack of support, financial, from all sources, as well as the difficulties involved in interpersonal relations. On the positive side, there were the statistically verifiable achievements found in the reports of Elmhurst, P.C. Lowell, and others, such as crop output, soil reclamation and reforestation, creation of cooperatives, revival and creation of cottage industries, and in education, the establishment of schools and higher rates of literacy. And we should also add the significant contribution of a pioneering non-authoritarian model for primary education that's suited to village life, that gave priorities to the capabilities of the individual child. As former Minister of Education, Humayun Kabir, in his assessment of Tagore's educational work observed, practically every new development in Indian education since the beginning of the century owes something to Tagore's work that was initiated in Sriniketan, and that would include the rural reconstruction work at Sriniketan, as well as the influence it had on Gandhi's model for basic education and many other influences. So let me stop there.
Wonderful, Kathy. As usual, always lucid and succinct from what I remember from your lectures. And what you said reminded me of the Hitabodhi Shabhas, where the guiding principle was taking the tenant along. I think in an article written in 2014 for the ICCR journal, Umadi mentions this, and there is a reference to this major force which he wanted to disseminate and bring the masses along with him on his estate. So I think we've gained a lot from that. Thank you so much, Kathy. Next up, we have Mr. Shujit Shanal, who's been in the advertising profession for almost 50 years. And although he keeps promising he's going to retire, he says he hasn't done that yet. Currently, he functions as a visiting faculty to a few business schools, including Symbiosis at Pune, and he's authored titles including Life in a Rectangle, my memoirs about his advertising life and times in Kolkata in the 70s and 80s, and co-memoirs about other experiences as an advertising executive. He's founder of Oli's, the Advertising Roundtable, a forum for discussing matters on advertising, and he's been running Kahani Concerti, a digital platform devoted to art and entertainment, and dare I say to literature, which I've been privileged to be a part of, and to deliberate, discuss, and debate on all the art forms. So with that very eclectic and rich background, we await your remarks. Shujit Babu, go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta. The only thing is that I am actually in presence of this gathering, the panelists. I am really the barber who has been asked about the way. So that's the premise with which I am entering. And secondly, this is to Umadi. Umadi, I've been talking about your book to a lot of my friends. Some of them are in academics, some of them are not. But the biggest thing I find is that everybody, I say that, Professor Uma Dasgupta, and everybody says, oh, Umadi. So I think they got the wrong, it can't be that we're talking about the same person. But then they say, oito. So I know we are talking about the same person, which means that if you and I were to ever do a common people we know, it's going to be a long list. Now, having said that, the only academic part of Tagore that I have done myself is that I have been trying to put together and have made a few presentations on Tagore and advertising. Like, all his life, he had been modeling endorsing, whatever, all put together. But coming back to this book, which I had the privilege of anchoring, the first thing, Umadi, is now that I have gone through the book even more than the first time we met, when we were doing that office chat, is that to ask you, why did you write this book so many years later? Because you particularly have an umbilical cord with Sriniketan because of your parents. So I think this information about Sriniketan has come little, I mean, it could have come earlier. That's my, call it, complaint. Now, what is there in this book? I can only react with whatever are my takes in this. First of all, for me and many of us, it has completely changed the perspective of Tagore. You know, so far, the middle class Bengali has, Tagore has been the Rabindra Sangit, it has been the Bir Purush Kavita. And I know when we were growing up and in school, all our cousin sisters were sent to Dokhini or some place to learn Rabindra Sangit, which I presume would be kind of a potential for the marriage market. But beyond that, there were Tagore films based on Tagore, there were theaters and all kinds of things. But what has come out in this history of Sriniketan? Because for many of us, and a large number of us, I must admit, Tagore has been the academician, he has been the poet, he has been the Nobel Prize, he has been the painter, he has been the songs and all that, and he has been Shantiniketan, Vishwabharati, to put it. But Sriniketan, every time that we have even visited Shantiniketan during our college days and thereafter, particularly during Basantotsav, the whole thing has begun and ended with Tohe Vijobashi. And that's where the whole thing left. But we have been to Sriniketan, possibly to buy batik stuff, but that's about it. But I am finding a completely a new Tagore, a new Rabindranath through your book. And that is where I think I have totally carried away. And I intend to, this has triggered my aim to get into more on this Tagore, other than the Tagore that we know. And a lot of things that I have been coming across while I was going through this book. There's so many elements, environmentalist, talking about tree planting, kind of things we are talking today. He has talked about it and experimented that in the rural reconstruction of Sriniketan way back in 1931. We are talking now. We are now talking about water conservation. We are talking about planting trees. All that has happened, and even if one were to use an advertising language, they have been branded like the Victoropon and so on. Everything has been done. Why didn't we take it forward? That's the first question I think we like to ask. I like to ask myself and even my peers and some of my seniors. Why didn't we do that? It's all there. It was all there. Today we are politically talking of things like Manrega and all such rural schemes. But the rural scheme is here. It was here in Sriniketan way back in 1931. And not only that, I've even talked to some of my friends, the left-oriented friends. I told them that from what I have read over there, his concern for equitable distribution of land to the peasants. So I have asked them that, do you think this could have been the seeds for what is later what they took up as the Tebhaga Andolon, the Tebhaga movement? I think Tebhaga movement, some of the early thoughts, I think they were here in Sriniketan, because, and also his differences with the Congress party, or whatever, in the sense that he had actually said that you are not much about the social factor, the social equitability factor. You're looking at more at the nationalistic factor, and those were some of the differences that has happened. There are some very interesting things that you have mentioned, and this goes completely to the hard work you have done. And like everybody was saying, that digging up data, putting it together, running through it. Some of the very small incidents is the incident about the house catching fire and the tiles, somebody were told to go and break the tiles and bring it down to stop the fire. And nobody was going to do that till some people were beaten up and told to do it. Only then they did it. And later they admitted that if you were not beaten up, you wouldn't have done it. So while Rabindranath felt very ashamed when we was told this, but the fact is that this is a world which we did not know. And therefore to you, the big thank you is for having given us that picture, given us that story, given us that history. And that is something that, we are, many of us, I think, are really getting carried away with. And there are little things of, the health factor. the way he was concerned about rural health. A few years back, I was on a team advising the National Health Mission in Uttar Pradesh. And I found that there were a lot of, if I had read this book before, then maybe I could have picked up and twisted and tweaked a lot of things and put it as a part of the action plan. And that famous thing about Professor Amherst, the 3 M's, the monkey, I think I noted it down somewhere. And another factor that I think has emerged out of this whole thing, I see in this Tagore as a proper management person. For instance, he invested time and resources and people in researching. So like we do in today's world, when a product is launched, there is a lot of research that goes in or an idea is to be. So he had done he also believed in those surveys, which I'm calling them to be some kind of, well, they were some kind of market research of sorts. You call them survey, you call them research. And also the fact that the little informative booklets that were written meant for those people on a lot of factors. There's a huge list that you have given. So it was not only survey, it was also communication, and he was much into it. So he was probably running it like a complete seasoned management specialist. So here we are finding a different Tagore here. It's not the poet. Here is and that I think is where this book, A History of Sriniketan, has, it has really jumped leaps. 2 factors before I end. One is this book, I think, should actually be a part of some curriculum in academic institutions. You cannot just read, you cannot just go into Tagore without the history of Sriniketan and some other books related to it. This, I think there should be some representations to put this as definitely as a part of academic or curriculum, syllabus, whatever you call it. And there's one more thing, and I'm putting this to the complete the fora over here, everybody. Can this blueprint that Tagore had put up, self-sustenance to health, to everything, to environment, to education, to plantation, to whatever, is it possible to put it all together and carry it forward to various other parts of the country and try it out and see what happens? We can try, some of them can actually be tried out here in Bengal. Some of it can be tried out elsewhere.
Thank you so much, Shuchit Babu. That was a well thought out, looking forward.
But this is a blueprint that I think.
Shuchit Babu, we're a little out of time.
Go ahead. I'm finished.
Wanted to thank you for a most refreshing look at how we can think about implementing all those issues that you brought out about sustainability, biodiversity, and why is it that we haven't even thought about implementing those actionable events that could become a way towards progress. Thank you so much. And I do agree with you. Umani's book incorporates the appendices so well, the expenses, there's a bit of humor there too. And the images are quite telling just on their own. So without further ado.
Can I just butt in for a minute? Since you talked about the
yes, go ahead.
Just one line. In that appendix which is there is also talk about the balance sheet. It also talks about opium, cost of opium and poppy.
Yeah.
In other words, gajar khorcha. That is also included in that, and that I think was a remarkable piece of a balance sheet. That's it. Yes. Which went to Tagore. He approved it. Right. Thank you. Carry on, Julie. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you so much. You've added so much diversity to this evening. Thank you. Professor Amita Chatterjee is up next. She's Professor Emerita Department of Philosophy, School of Cognitive Science, Chatterjee University in Kolkata. Mihaela remembers you well, Amita Di, and I'm sure that you will have an opportunity to talk to each other. Dr. Chatterjee was Editor-in-Chief, Journal of Indian Council of Philosophical Research, CPR. Second Vice President, 2015 to 19, Division of Logic, Methodology, Philosophy of Science and Technology, International Union of History and Philosophy of Science and Technology, National Fellow for 2012 to 2014, Indian Council of Philosophical Research, New Delhi, and First Vice Chancellor, Presidency University, Kolkata, 2010 to 2011. Her publications include Understanding Vagueness, 1994, Mental Reasoning, Experiments and Theories, co-authored with Smita Sharkar, 2009, Acharya Brojendranath Sheel, 2018, Indian Philosophy and Meditation, Perspectives on Consciousness, which was co-authored with Rahul Banerjee in 2018, The Study of Internal States in Theory and Practice, A Perspective from Indian Psychology, co-authored with Rahul Banerjee and Preetha Mukhopadhyay in 2021, and Kolpo Golpe Monodarshan, Philosophy of Mind through Thought Experiments in 2021. So her question is, granting that the seeds of rural reconstruction were sown during Tagore's Shelidaho days, whether there was any significant difference between young Tagore's vision and the vision and policies of the mature Tagore. And then, of course, the concerns with the environment and why she considers Rabindranath Tagore's thoughts around Sriniketan quite revolutionary. Amita Di, take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay, greetings to all of you. And I shall begin my presentation with a confession. I am not a Tagore scholar, but I'm surrounded by very authentic Tagore scholars all around me at Jadavpur, and therefore I dare not publish a lot on Tagore or dare not speak a lot on Tagore. But like any other educated Bengali, I have learned to love Tagore, and you cannot do serious philosophy teaching, you know, without teaching Tagore's philosophy. And whenever I get stuck with any problem, whatever under the sun, I open collected volumes of Tagore's writings, and I found some solutions from there. And these are my only credentials. And I'm really grateful to Julie for including me in this august audience. But before I offer my observations on the book, please once again allow me to put on record my appreciation and gratitude to our dear Umadi for bringing into focus the rural reconstruction program at Sriniketan, which Tagore considered his life's work. Professor Dasgupta has given a historically authentic and fascinating account of Rabindranath's rural experiments, starting from Tagore's Shelidaho days till the end of the third decade of the 20th century. Umadi has written that in Shelidaho estate, Tagore's role was that of a responsible and engaged landlord who was trying to alleviate the sufferings of his subjects, to empower them by building their self-esteem and by making them self-reliant. And definitely the seeds of his subsequent vision on rural reconstruction were there during his Shelidaho days. But his Sriniketan experiment was not only more mature and a holistic generalization of his Shelidaho dreams. It should touch the village's life in all aspects, but I think his approach is much more radical here. He was very critical of the zamindari system at this period of his life and started thinking of vesting all powers to the cooperatives of the villages. He felt that was the only way of making his subjects self-reliant. Though he was not for leading a group of rebels, he was not thinking of maintaining the status quo either. So it leads me to think that the vision and philosophy of mature Rabindranath around rural reconstruction had some difference than those of the young landlord. I would like to know whether Umadi would agree with me or not. And the second point, which surprises me in Umadi's narrative, is that of tackling the story of tackling the monkey problem in the villages in the early days of Sriniketan experiment. As monkeys were destroying the crops regularly, the villagers were suffering, but they were not ready to get rid of them because of their beliefs in the Ramayana story. The Sriniketan team, writes Umadi, initiated a dialogue with a number of villagers, which of course took time and plenty of negotiations. The villagers finally agreed to, quote unquote, kill monkeys for the larger cause of increasing the production of food grains. I would of course like to know what quote unquote kill means here, knowing Tagore's philosophy of environment, that he was always in favor of harmony between progress and preservation and against conquer and dominate model. And as he was to be informed of every step taken at Surul, as has been pointed out by Elmhurst, it is unbelievable that he allowed to literally kill monkeys for saving food grains or for any other pragmatic consideration. Would Professor Dasgupta please enlighten us on this point? My third observation is based on the concluding chapter of the book. It is true that Tagore did not intend to initiate a revolution through his Sriniketan project, yet his vision behind this project was indeed novel and very progressive. He wanted a complete awakening of the village's mind because, as Umadi has written, much depended on the individual's commitment to the cause and what the individual made of their job on their own initiative. Umadi further writes that Rabindranath often spoke about his faith in individuals rather than the systems. Awakening of an individual mind is indeed very difficult, but these comments should not lead one to think that Tagore was supporting liberal individualism of a capitalist kind, nor was he aiming at equality following the Marxist-Leninist totalitarian model, though in 1930, in his letters from Russia, he wrote very enthusiastically about developments in Russia and said that the Russians could achieve on a large scale what he aimed at a small scale in his Sriniketan experiment. Through awakening of individual mind, he actually wanted to arouse the entire village community. That is why cooperative movement and forming of village councils was so important to him. He always believed as long as there is suffering, deprivations, and lack of dignity in this world, a single individual cannot gain deliverance in isolation. He was therefore trying to cut out, a middle path of community development between liberal individualism and a systemic totalitarianism. Though through awakening of individual mind and attaining progress of the community as a whole. Though in the main text, somebody might find that Umadi has not discussed the cooperative movement in details, excepting in the context of cooperative health societies, her appendices really highlight the importance of cooperative movement and how to raise the quality of village life and how to revamp village economy through this cooperative movement. And so, anyone who is trying to gain some insight in this particular area, they be really greatly benefited by Umadi's contribution. This book really helps us understand Tagore better as a whole. And so, Umadi, thank you again.
Thank you, Amita Di. And, you know, to a post-colonial scholar, what you have said makes so much sense, because while you were speaking, I was thinking of Raja Rao's Kanthapura, which is 1938, published 1938. And he was speaking of Tagore's ideas of igniting the community through individual, inspiring the individual. So I think that's the point that none of us have heard yet, but which very much was front and center of Tagore's experiment at reconstructing the rural in Sriniketan. Thank you so much. Next up is Mitali Chakraborty, the founding editor of Borderless Journal, an online forum which nurtures a special section on Tagore. Archived in the Singapore National Library, Borderless Journal is an exploration of a world beyond borders and hopes to unite mankind under one sky to celebrate the human spirit. What a lovely trope, that one sky, which we spoke about before the talk, Mitali. Currently, Borderless is in the process of bringing out its first anthology with Om Books International. Mitali has also authored a book of humorous essays on living in China, where she spent 8 years, called In the Land of Dragons. Trained as a journalist to cover the arts and developmental issues, she has written for the Statesman, Times of India, Hindustan Times, A Pioneer, and Daily Star, and other online forums and anthologies. Mitali translates Tagore's poetry from Bangla to English with the hope of learning to write from the maestro. So Mitali, do go ahead. We would love to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm really in awe of the company and the club. This is a library I'd love to visit. I'll be talking of weaving human excellence into rural reconstruction. So I'm truly honored to be invited here and would like to thank Professor Uma Dasgupta and Dr. Julie Mehta for the privilege. I must say, A History of Sriniketan held me spellbound, for what the book described was exactly what I saw my father and NGO strive for through his life. A little before he passed on, my father insisted I read Atmaporichaya to understand Tagore's exploration of human excellence. Human excellence, by what I understood, is helping each individual get in touch with his inner strength and resilience so that he can be more productive. Reading A History of Sriniketan made this concept fall into place. The book reinforces the vision of a holistic, inclusive world with human welfare at its core, while describing how Tagore set up Sriniketan, how it has benefited the villagers in the long run, with some amount of discussion on Shantiniketan, as the two constitute Tagore's world vision, with education for both the underprivileged and the privileged running hand in hand, creating a symbiotic relationship. Though the book touches on the concept of one world as a family, or in modern terms, global unity, similar to some of Harari's ideas about a post-pandemic world, it delves deeper into what can actually bring about this change in humans to make it a reality. Tagore talked of development not only of processes and systems, but also at an individual level, as he viewed each single individual as a component of a larger whole. Professor Dasgupta writes, the thrust was for a change of attitude. Rabindranath consistently argued that only those changes would endure that had been brought about from a change in human psychology. In other words, it would have to be a change from within the individual and from within the society itself. This is still a felt need in a world threatened by crisis formed out of man's inconsiderate exploitation of nature, of insurmountable chasms between different groups to satisfy the needs of a few, and war born of inhuman human constructs and greed. All these are at the core calling out for a change in mindsets or human nature. Tagore identified that 100 years ago. He wrote, "Any teaching concerning man must have human nature for its chief element. How far it will harmonize with human nature is a matter of time. The evolution towards a more inclusive, accepting, and tolerant world that many gurus like Harari are mooting currently is possible only with a change in mindsets propounded by Tagore. And the book tells us how he implemented this." Tagore wrote to an estate worker in Kaligram, Otul Sen, in 1915, "A note of joy has to be sounded in all your work. If a festive element is introduced on the day in which a new work is started, such as the construction of a road is launched, a religious appearance will be imparted to all your social activities." And then another suggestion in the same letter: "It will do a lot of good to the villager if he can be induced to take to the hobby of cultivating flowers." Let us not forget this cultivation of beauty has become a very great necessity in our country. It lifts the spirits up. Professor Dasgupta explains further, "The aim surely was life in its completeness, and again, not by charity, but by cooperation. He wanted the deprived to become self-sufficient and self-reliant by taking charge of their needs by themselves on a cooperative basis." And what was the response to this? Professor Dasgupta writes, "It would not be an exaggeration to say that Rabindranath had to overcome opposition and to conquer space and time in no uncertain measure. As a first step, he insisted that Indians should unite to provide nation-building services to the village and not look to the state for doing what was our duty towards our people. For him, this had to be the more important function of the Swaraj being sought from alien rule." The professor continues, "In Rabindranath's views, what had misled society in our transition to modernity was the introduction of the Western concepts of private property and material progress. Noticeable here is that what is isolated are particular values and trends, and it is not a tirade against the West as a whole, for it was Lord Elmhurst, a Westerner, who set up the agrarian reforms for Sriniketan. Professor Dasgupta has skillfully put these ideas together by bringing into perspective Tagore's own poetry and essays into her text. Through these, she asserts he, that is Tagore, lamented that our rural folk were not conscious of their own strength. He pointedly added that the upper classes of our society would live in such comfort and complacency only because the common people had surrendered their human rights and chose to remain subservient." And this can be seen in a lot of his poetry and stories as well. He reiterates this. At the end of this lovely book, I felt that Tagore was more than just a sum total of his poetry, songs, and writerly output. He was a visionary, one whose experiments, ideals, and ideas contextualized to the current world's need could help us look forward to a more progressive future. Maybe take us a step forward into the world that Harari is talking of, or the management gurus and all these people are talking of, towards a global unity. This has to be taken up at an international level and not just at a national level. It is an international need. Tagore's views are internationally relevant. That's what I felt reading Umadi's book. And I'm truly grateful that she wrote this tremendous book. Thanks a lot for having me here.
Thank you so much,
I'm done.
Mithali. Thank you so much, Mithali.
Thanks.
You have explicated the salient issues in the book beautifully. You've signposted the aesthetic component and the words holistic, global unity, all that he stood for as a universalist instead of just a nationalist. And that's a whole other debate. But I just wanted to mention that those words, not by charity, but by cooperation. I think that's
Yes.
the nut. That's the nut.
Very
And you
important.
brought it out beautifully. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have Mihaila Gligor, who has a connection with Jabalpur University. I'm so excited because it connects me to you, Mihaila, with an old alma mater. And Mihaila is a PhD, a researcher in the philosophy of culture at the Romanian Academy of Cluj-Napoca, George Baritiu Institute of History, Department of Socio-Human Research. She's Associate Professor at the Faculty of History and Philosophy, Babeș-Bolyai University, Cluj-Napoca, Cluj, founder and director of Cluj Center for Indian Studies from Babeș-Bolyai University. Take it away, Mihaila. Looking greatly forward to hearing your views.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you and to see Umadi and to see Professor Chatterjee and to see all of you. It's great to be in Kolkata even in this form. I'm very happy for many reasons. First, this morning I remember when I met Professor Dasgupta. It was 2011, I think. We were together in a conference at Rabindra Bharati, and I was very young and very scared. I felt like speaking about God in his own house because everybody knew everything about Rabindranath, and I was just starting to learn about him, and it was great to be there and to listen to Professor Dasgupta and other people that were part of the conference. I was very fortunate to receive in the same year Professor Dasgupta in Bucharest for a conference. We organized a big festival called the Namaste India Festival, and Professor Dasgupta was kind enough to come to Bucharest and to give a lecture. And she also invited me on another occasion to Bengal Club, so I'm very happy to be here again with you. She is also very nice and very helpful. She helped me many times when I was searching something about Tagore, and she agreed to be part of the scientific board of our Cluj Center for Indian Studies and also of our journal, the Romanian Journal of Indian Studies. So I'm thanking you again for everything. And I'm very privileged to be among the few Romanians to read this amazing book. I had no idea about Tagore did in Sriniketan and Sriniketan until I was there to visit. And I was very impressed to see everything he did, and the students he had, many Nobel laureates came from there. So it was an amazing thing that he managed to do. And from this volume, all of us can learn that Tagore offered in Sriniketan full access to an alternative education, which was something new in India of those times. And he transferred the joy of creation to this incredible place and established something that not only lasts today, but broke all the rules of traditional education and inspired students to see far beyond manuals and books and stuff like that, and to see into the very soul of a total education. And I have a few friends from Romania and Germany and this area, and they were very keen to come to Sriniketan and to study and to learn many things about what Tagore managed to establish there. And I think this book is very important because we can learn many, many new things about his work. And as a researcher, I'm very happy to see some documents and transcription of all the letters and pictures and everything that Uma Dasgupta put it in this book. So I will recommend it to my students, and this volume is a must for all those people who want to learn many, many things, many good things about Tagore and the school he created, and to also to visualize the incredible responsibility and joy Tagore put into action into this incredible institution. So I'm very happy to read this book and to speak a few things about it, and also about Professor Dasgupta. And it's a privilege for me to be here with you. I'm also not a specialist on Tagore. I'm still learning. There are so many things I don't know, and I hope to come back to India again and again and to see everything at the source. So thank you so much for having me. All the best wishes from here. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mihaela. Such a precious response to the book, full of your own lived experiences, your connection with Umadi, and what you're garnering from this wonderful book, A History of Sriniketan. Thank you for those thoughts, and we'll all carry them back with us because they're so heartfelt. Come back again, come and visit again.
I will, very soon. Thank you.
Good. So they say we save the best for the last. I don't know whether this is the best. All of you have been so amazingly insightful, perceptive, lucid. But we have to round up Professor Nigel Hughes, who's Professor of Geology in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, University of California at Riverside in the USA, the author of over 130 peer-reviewed research articles and monographs. He's worked and published extensively on the geology of the Indian subcontinent and is co-leader of UNESCO IGCP 668 project on the early history of Southeast Asia. He was a foreign casual student in Shantiniketan in '85 and is an author of the children's book Monishar Pathorer Bon, Monisha and the Stone Forest, 2012 Geological Society of India, Bon Fokira Press. A place-based geoscience education project set in rural Birbhum. This is only a thumbnail sketch of Professor Hughes. You just have to go to YouTube and see the excellent interviews, and Geology 101 is right in front of us, whether you're a literary scholar, whether you're a historian, or whether you're from the social sciences. He makes such a difficult subject so interesting. So he must be a great teacher. Before I turn it over to Professor Hughes, I would like to just point out that he mentions after reading the book, it is clear to me that were Rabindranath not so famous for all his other accomplishments, his role as an internationally important practitioner in comprehensive rural developmental work would be more widely assured and appreciated. And that's something that I echo and I chime with. And that was my first realization when I read A History of Sriniketan. Hey, we know so little about this experiment. If you're a literature student, you're honed, you're focused, and you're literally led by your nose to look at his literary work, but there was so much more to go. So please, Professor Hughes, do throw some light on what you thought of Umadi's book.
Well, Namaskar. Thank you to you for the invitation to be part of this wonderful meeting. So much has been said, and I've been ticking off the various things I was going to say because others have said them so much more eruditely than myself. But my only connection really with Shantiniketan is that I was a foreign casual student under our beloved and recently departed Shomen Banerjee in 1985-86. And I really, through Shumandar and also Shamali Kastagir and Umadi and others, I was able to get some kind of feeling of the spirit of Shantiniketan enduring beyond Rabindranath himself. My interest, as Julie mentioned, is really in the very ancient history of India. So I'm not somebody who's really practically related to the activities in Sriniketan and the work that was done there in an agricultural sense. So my observations are more, those of somebody who is a Boyanik, but is sort of somewhat detached from that experiment. And so when I thought about this and what to say, of course, one thought about people like me who are both British and American, and I thought of Elmhurst and Dorothy Strait, of course. And there's a wonderful introduction. Umadi mentioned The Religion of Man, Tagore's lecture series that he gave in Oxford in 1930. And in one of the introductions to a recent edition of that, there's a quote from Elmhurst. And I'd just like to read that quote. This was written after Rabindranath's death. Elmhurst wrote, "To see a new country with him was a perpetual delight. If you ask me why, I would say there was no aspect of human existence which did not exercise some fascination for him, and around which he did not allow his mind and fertile imagination to play. Where as a young man, I had been brought up in a world in which religious and secular were separate, he insisted that in poetry, music, art, and life, they were one, that there should be no dividing line." And I think one of the great contributions, many contributions that Umadi has made, but one of the great things was to bring out just how deeply Rabindranath's religious convictions were central to everything he was doing, and the guiding posts that linked this extraordinary breadth of activity. And when one reads Umadi's book, in the context of the colonial era, the absolutely vast scope of activities that were being initiated and experimented with at Sriniketan is just totally astonishing. And of course, but reflecting Rabindranath's view that only as Mitali stressed, only if there is this connection between the personal and the inner person, the outer person, and then all society as a whole, and also to the environment around us. It's only if that connection is made whole that the project can really have hope of success. I think as a Westerner, of course, we see Rabindranath. One thinks of that photo of Gandhi's visit to Shantiniketan in 1940. You see these two iconic Indians, one dressed in his dhoti, as Gandhi referred to it as his -4s, as opposed to the +4s that the English sahibs were wearing, and Rabindranath in his own long flowing gown. And that seems, these seem very iconically Indian characters, which of course they were. But of course, Rabindranath's clothes even were the subject of, just as Elmhurst says, his own design, each aspect of this, the connection between the inner and the outer, so immediately expressed in the clothes he was wearing and the design aspect of that. And this flowed from the individual to all the myriad different activities. And the last thing I really wanted to add is that, of course, there's such a breadth in Sriniketan of work that was completed. And we can only be impressed by this. But just how pioneering this work was is really astonishing. If one takes just some aspect, the rural surveys and the statistical work that was being done that is presented, some of which is presented in the appendix. The generation and the evolution of statistical methods by Mahalanobis and others is something that, you know, Sriniketan and the analyses that were being done of its effectiveness played a real role in the development of statistical tools. And we know, of course, that Umadi spent many years at ISI, and that connection between ISI and Shantiniketan through Mahalanobis is not just a personal connection. It's also an expression of the way in which analysis of the effectiveness of the various programs that were being undertaken was a key part of that project. And just in conclusion, you know, each of us in our very minor ways would like to try and continue towards legacy. I'm going to put into the chat a link to our latest geoscience outreach project, which is talking about India's migration as a subcontinent northwards and building of the Himalaya. We want to do an animated series in Bengali, in Hindi, probably in a South Indian language, and make it freely available over the internet. Shamali was the original World Wide Web. It is wonderful that we are able to have the Shantiniketan community together electronically today. And let's hope that this aspect of technology, at least, can bring the world together in the way that Rabindranath is so exemplified. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Professor Hughes. That was scintillating. And I think we've come to a point where Umadi might be on call to answer questions that our panelists might have. And might I just request, with your permission, Umadi, Radha Chakraborty is here. And I think Radha probably has a question. She is a Tagore translator. Radha, are you there?
Yes, yes, I am there. Yes.
Hi, Radha. Yes.
Hello.
Hi. Would you like to post the question that you have for Umadi? And then we will do a round robin and see what questions the panelists have. I know Amita has some questions, and I have a funny question, but we will go with yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Umadi, for asking me to join this discussion. I couldn't join as a panelist because I wasn't sure if I'd be in town, but it was really an eye-opener reading your book. I learned so much from it. And I think one of the things the book reminds us of is the need to have a more holistic vision of Tagore's achievement and contribution, because we tend to have rather a stereotypical view of Tagore as the poet and so on. So I think this book, is a very great balancing factor, which draws us beyond that stereotype and asks us to reconsider Tagore. And it is really time for an important reappraisal of Tagore. I've also recently translated Amade Shantiniketan, the memoirs of the Bengali writer Mahashweta Devi, who studied in Shantiniketan in the 1930s as a little girl. And she says in this memoir how Shantiniketan and Tagore's influence shaped her very approach to life. And we know that Mahashweta Devi is today remembered for her social activism and her social awareness and her work with the rural world. So it was very interesting to see and to think about Tagore's legacy. And thinking about these social angles, what struck me, one of the things I really noticed in the book was this idea, this reference to how the Tagore's work with the artisans had a social and sociological effect in the way that it somehow began to dissolve certain caste barriers and created an interface between class and caste. And I thought in today's discussion, we haven't said very much about this, but it is so very pertinent today. to think of that as a contribution, and it just happened alongside the work that Tagore was doing, this bringing down of barriers, which was of a piece with Tagore's whole vision in Shantiniketan, in his school and his university too. He brought everyone together irrespective of their background, and everyone followed the same life and the same principles there. So it's kind of a piece with that. And I would love to hear a little more from Umadi on this aspect of Tagore's legacy, because I really feel that it's something underplayed and we don't pay enough attention to it.
Excellent, Radha. Your question actually second guess is something that I would like to ask Umadi. So we'll just cache the questions, we'll corral the questions, and then we'll let Umadi handle them one by one. So Amita Di, what was your question then? Would you like to quickly reiterate it? You're muted. Can you unmute yourself, Amita Di?
Yes, I have unmuted myself. The first question that I asked confirmation from Umadi regarding the difference between Rabindranath's rural reconstruction program at Silagaha and rural reconstruction program at Shantiniketan, his attitude and vision.
Okay, I'm going to cut in here because we are really running short on time. So either this question or a light-hearted question, not really light-hearted, about the simian problem, the monkey problem, right? Would he actually allow the killing of monkeys? So looking at it in retrospect, that's one question. Radha Chakraborty's question speaks to mine, which is about how he worked with artisans, with people across the board, whether they were, whichever caste they were from. And that relates to my question about, I'm not quite sure whether Tagore was a vegetarian at some stage, or he became vegetarian, because I remember a story that was documented in an article about him saying, "Grane no ardha bhojana." So he talked about smelling the delightful smell of the chicken curry on the Goalanda steamer. And he was, he broke into a laugh and people said, well, you're no longer a Brahmin because you have smelled chicken curry. So does Umadi know anything about that? That's on, on the lighter note. Then we have your simian question. We have Radha Chakraborty's question on the caste. So let's start with these three before we get mired and we forget. Umadi, would you care to pop in and tell us what you think?
Yes, obviously there's hardly any time. We must wind up now. Yes, but very briefly, Amita, that monkey situation. Well, Amita, first of all, your initial question is a deep one, and I wouldn't say there's a great deal of difference, just very, very briefly, between his work in Shilaidaho and his work in Sriniketan. It started in Shilaidaho, and we know why, because that was his very first exposure to the poverty, the great impoverishment of the peasantry. Leave alone everything else, because there's so much that one can be said, but impoverishment of the peasantry was something that was mind-boggling, and he knew that there was very little that could be done unless scientific agriculture could be brought to the peasantry. And his Sriniketan work took that forward. Very briefly, that's what, I don't think there was a change in vision. I think the vision was one and an evolving one, and the action that vision obviously required was being put into place, was being implemented. And this is why he had Leonard Elmhurst come, who was an agricultural scientist, to take this work forward. So very briefly, this is what I would say. The monkey question, although it might sound funny, but not really for the work. The monkeys did destroy food grain greatly. However, the people themselves did not want to kill monkeys. It's nothing very much to do with Rabindranath, to be honest. And this is entirely sort of part of Elmhurst's work. He tried, as the records say, as his reports say, some of which I have actually brought into the book. He tried very hard to persuade them to change this frame of mind. It was not easy to do, because these are very deep-seated and very humanitarian thing, very, very humane. Why should anyone want to kill? Never mind whether it's monkeys or anything. However, he was able to persuade them to do something about the problem, because it was affecting grain production. So again, very, very briefly, this is it. What was the other question?
Radha's question.
Radha's question about caste, and indeed, this was actually a very important outcome of some of the work that Sriniketan did. And there is some statistics that I brought into the book about how caste was being actually almost very, very steadily put into the back seat. Because at one time, for example, the weavers were the most important caste representation in the work. And the weavers were very caste conscious too. But for example, the leather workers, some of the leather workers were left out of the work initially, because they did not belong to caste, they belonged to subcastes. And that sort of thing, if you look at the statistics, I mean, this doesn't just require a kind of more narrative explanation. It obviously requires that we look at the statistics, was being underplayed by the people themselves. The caste workers were themselves, I think, recognizing how important it was that they work also with subcastes in these various activities, these various artisan activities. And that was actually happening. Again, not in a very big way. We all know this. I mean, it would be a pretense if we were to say that the social situation changed, that it was a revolutionary social situation, nothing like that. But certainly there was an impact. It is indeed something to be recognized, and the statistics given for some of the years, the 1930s, of the Sriniketan work does actually bring about even the minor changes, but important in their own way. These things have to start on a very small scale in order to impact this, because caste is not easy to change. Caste is something that was a birthright, both in the negative sense, very negative sense. You know, people who were high castes actually had the advantage of being high caste by birth, and people who were in the lower castes or subcastes obviously were disadvantaged. So to bring about that kind of change, as any anthropologist who studied caste seriously would say that this would be a very, very important thing, both very important subject to study, a very important subject of research. And one does see evolutionary outcomes, but not to say, obviously, that there was something of a revolutionary change, but there was change, and we can see it in the figures of the caste groups that were part of Sriniketan's very, very active work in craft making. Sriniketan was a great place for crafts. Thank you.
Thank you. Umadi, was Tagore a vegetarian at any point in his life?
Sorry, Julie?
Was Rabindranath Tagore a vegetarian? Did he turn vegetarian?
What question? I don't think he was vegetarian. No.
Good.
I don't think. In fact, I have heard from my parents, who you did mention, who were there for those 2 years, well, little more than 2 years, 2 to 3 years, in 1936 and 37, and were part of the circle, that he was very fond of the Bren cutlet, which was a particular, very fond of that. And my mother was very fond of saying, "Oh, no wonder he had great wrists, very strong." I mean, I don't think that.
In my foodways research on Tagore, I didn't find very much about his food preferences, or I believe he could give very good instructions to his Khansamas.
Imagine that.
Yeah, he was a connoisseur of good food.
Yes, he was
wonderful.
So much. So food was one of them, I'm sure.
Yeah. So
very creative recipes he talked about.
Thakur Bari Randa is again quite something that one can.
So on that very happy note, let's raise a glass and thank Umadi, thank each of our panelists, who've given such a lot of their time and expertise. And for me, it's been old connections made anew with Kathy, for instance, and then new connections with Professor Hughes, and then with Professor Marsh. And I think all of us, the messages that have been coming to me on WhatsApp, people have enjoyed being here, and we are so grateful that you're all here.
I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Umadi. Thank you so much. And on the 4th of August, as we always do, just alerting you, we have a firebrand writer who will be in conversation with me and all of us for the book club of the Bengal Club. And her name is Ayelet Sabari. She's Yemeni, Jewish, Canadian, and Israeli. And she'll be talking about identity and what it means to belong and what is home. So we'll be talking about her book, The Art of Leaving. That's on our book club list this month. So if any of you are interested, you're all welcome to be here. Thank you so much again, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.